If you want to buy a house in Texas, you pay a landlord. If you want to build a farm in Ohio, you pay a farmer. But if you walk 10 miles outside of Las Vegas, you are standing on land that cannot be bought at any price. If you fly over the American West at night, the state of Nevada looks like a vast, empty void of total darkness, interrupted only by the explosive neon brilliance of Las Vegas. It creates the illusion that this state is empty because nobody wants to be there. But the reality is far more complicated and far more intentional. While you might own your home or your land in New York, Texas, or Florida, Nevada operates under a completely different set of rules. Here, the federal government of the United States is not just a governing body, it is the landlord. They legally own and control over 80% of the land in this state, a statistic that is higher than anywhere else in the nation. To put that into perspective, the government owns less than 1% of New York State. So exactly why is there such a massive discrepancy? The answer isn't just about dry sand and undrinkable water. It is a story involving a failed law from the 19th century, the desperate need for strategic military testing during the Cold War, and a geography so hostile that it literally rejected modern civilization. To understand this massive federal footprint, we have to go back to 1862. The United States government actually wanted to give this land away. President Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act with the specific goal of settling the western frontier. The deal was incredibly simple. Move west, claim 160 acres of land, farm it for 5 years, and it became yours for free. This system worked perfectly in states like Iowa and Nebraska, where the soil was rich and rain was plentiful. Millions of acres were successfully transferred from the government to private farmers. But when settlers arrived in the Nevada territory, the system completely collapsed. The laws were written by politicians on the rainy East Coast who had no concept of the arid American West. In Nevada, 160 acres was not enough land to support a single family because there was simply no water. You could not grow crops, and you could not graze cattle effectively on such a small plot. As a result, settlers surveyed the land, realized it was useless for traditional farming, and simply kept moving toward California. The land remained unclaimed, and by default, it stayed federal property. The geography itself was fighting against privatization. Nevada sits almost entirely within the Great Basin, a hydrological anomaly where water does not flow to the ocean, but instead sinks into the ground or evaporates. This creates a landscape that is brutally dry and mountainous. The federal government realized their mistake with the original Homestead Act and tried to fix it. They passed the Desert Land Act and later the Stock-Raising Homestead Act, increasing the claimable land to 640 acres. But even this was not enough. In the arid high desert, a rancher needs thousands of acres just to feed a small herd of cattle. The math simply did not work for private enterprise. Without access to massive irrigation projects, the land had zero commercial value. Since nobody wanted to buy it, and nobody could survive on it, the title to the land never transferred. It sat in the hands of the Department of the Interior, not because they seized it, but because they literally could not give it away. This accidental ownership created a massive vacuum of empty space that would soon become invaluable for a completely different reason. By the time the 20th century arrived, the United States had entered a new era of warfare that required something rare: isolation. As World War II began, the military needed vast, uninhabited spaces to test aerial gunnery and bombing ranges. The empty Nevada desert was perfect. It was already owned by the government, so they didn't need to buy out private citizens or deal with complex legal battles. They simply reclassified the land from public domain to military withdrawal. This trend accelerated dramatically with the onset of the Cold War. The development of nuclear weapons required a testing ground that was far from population centers yet accessible from the mainland United States. The Nevada test site was established in 1951, just 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Over the next 4 decades, the United States conducted over 900 nuclear tests in this region. This cemented the government's grip on the land. You cannot sell land that is radioactive, cratered by explosions, and highly classified. The military necessity of the Cold War effectively locked millions of acres into federal control permanently, transforming the state into a fortress of restricted access. Beyond the military, another agency emerged as a massive landowner, the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM. Today, the BLM manages roughly 48 million acres in Nevada alone. Unlike the military, which fences off land for secrecy, the BLM manages land for multi-use. This is a complex balancing act that includes grazing for cattle ranchers, mining claims, and public recreation. This system is unique to the American West. In the East, if a mining company finds gold, they negotiate with a private landowner. In Nevada, they negotiate with the federal government. This has turned the state into a massive resource extraction hub where the profits are private, but the land remains public. Nevada is the world's 4th largest producer of gold, and almost all of those mines are on federal land. The government collects royalties and fees, creating a revenue stream that incentivizes them to keep the land rather than sell it. This economic model reinforces the status quo. The mining companies prefer the stability of federal leases over the chaotic process of buying fractured private parcels, and the government prefers the steady income and control over strategic resources. This tension between federal control and local use exploded in the late 20th century with the Sagebrush Rebellion. In the 1970s and 80s, Nevada residents began to aggressively demand that the federal land be transferred to state control. They argued that decisions about Nevada land should be made in Carson City, not Washington, D.C. The movement gained significant political traction, with supporters arguing that the federal government was strangling the state's economic development. If the land were private, they argued, it could be developed for housing, industry, and taxation. However, the rebellion largely failed due to the sheer cost of management. The state of Nevada realized that if they took ownership of the land, they would also inherit the cost of managing wildfires, maintaining roads, and administering mining claims. The federal government spends hundreds of millions of dollars annually managing this territory. For a state with a relatively small tax base, taking on this financial burden would be catastrophic. So, while the rhetoric of independence was strong, the economic reality forced the state to accept the federal government's continued dominance over the landscape. There is also a critical environmental dimension to this ownership. The fragile desert ecosystem of the Great Basin is home to endangered species like the desert tortoise and the sage grouse. Because the land is federally owned, it is subject to the National Environmental Policy Act. This gives the government the power to block development to protect biodiversity. If this land were private, it would be fragmented by fences, roads, and subdivisions, which would destroy the habitat connectivity these species need to survive. The federal ownership creates contiguous blocks of wilderness that act as massive nature preserves. This has become a major flashpoint in recent years as renewable energy companies seek to build massive solar farms in the desert. While solar energy is green, the construction of these facilities destroys the local habitat. Because the land is federal, every solar project becomes a national debate about land use priorities. The government is forced to choose between producing clean energy for the nation and preserving the untouched wilderness of the desert, a conflict that only exists because one single entity owns it all. However, the most famous aspect of federal land in Nevada is undoubtedly Area 51. This highly classified detachment of Edwards Air Force Base sits deep within the Nevada Test and Training Range. The existence of this facility highlights the ultimate power of federal land ownership: total exclusion. The government can simply redraw maps and vanish vast territories from public access. While conspiracy theories about aliens dominate pop culture, the real utility of this land is for testing stealth technology and advanced drones. The isolation provided by the surrounding federal land acts as a massive buffer zone. You cannot spy on a base if you cannot get within 50 miles of it. The mountains surrounding the Groom Lake facility serve as natural barriers, and the land ownership serves as the legal barrier. This buffer zone is essential for national security. If the surrounding land were private, developers could build high-rise hotels or observation towers right next to the fence line. Federal ownership ensures that the military has a sandbox the size of Switzerland, where they can operate completely unobserved by the outside world. As Las Vegas continues to explode in population, the pressure on this federal boundary line is intensifying. Las Vegas is effectively an island of private land, surrounded by a sea of federal territory. The city is running out of space to grow. To solve this, Congress periodically passes specific legislation, like the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act, which allows the BLM to auction off specific parcels of desert to private developers. This creates a fascinating, controlled expansion. The city can only grow when the federal government gives permission. The revenue from these land sales doesn't go into the general treasury. It stays in Nevada to fund parks, conservation, and education. This creates a strange, symbiotic relationship where the city's growth is dependent on buying land from the very entity that constrains it. It is a slow, methodical release of pressure. Unlike other cities that sprawl uncontrollably, Las Vegas's expansion is dictated by federal bureaucracy. This effectively makes the U.S. government the city planner for one of the fastest-growing metropolitan areas in the country, controlling the supply of land to manage the demand. Ultimately, the reason the U.S. government owns 80% of Nevada is a mixture of historical accident and strategic necessity. It began as a failure of policy, where the land was simply too harsh to be given away. But over the last century, that worthlessness transformed into immense value. The empty space became a crucial asset for military testing, a treasure trove of mineral wealth, and a sanctuary for endangered ecosystems. Today, unwinding this ownership would be legally impossible and economically disastrous. The federal government is too deeply entrenched, and the state relies too heavily on federal management funding. While it may frustrate locals and fuel political debates, the map of Nevada is unlikely to change. It remains a unique anomaly in the American experiment, a state where the frontier never truly closed, and where the federal government remains the eternal guardian of the empty horizon. This vast, silent desert serves as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable land is the land that nobody wanted. Thanks for watching Global Vantage, and if you want to understand more about the hidden geography of the U.S., make sure to subscribe.